You have probably heard this fact so many times it stopped feeling like a fact and started feeling like background noise. Ancient humans only lived to 30, maybe 35 if they were lucky. Short, brutal lives ended by illness and predators and cold and all the things the modern world has slowly removed from the equation of human survival. You heard it in school. You have seen it in documentaries. You have read it in articles that used it to make a point about how far humanity has come. And here is the problem with all of that. It is not true. Not in the way it has been told to you. Not in any way that means what most people think it means when they hear it. The 30-year figure is real. The number exists. It comes from real data and real research and real calculation. But what it describes is something so different from what most people assume it describes that calling it the same fact is almost misleading. Today we are going back to the beginning, to the real lives of the people that number came from, to what they actually experienced, to how long they actually lived when they survived the thing that was genuinely killing them, and to the truth about what your ancestors were actually capable of that the 30-year figure has been quietly hiding for as long as anyone has been repeating it. The number AND, what it actually means, let us start with the mathematics, because the mathematics is where everything goes wrong. 30 years. Life expectancy at birth in ancient human populations. That is the figure. That is where it comes from. Life expectancy at birth. 3 words that carry the entire weight of the misunderstanding inside them. Life expectancy at birth is an average, a mathematical average of all the ages at death in a given population calculated from the moment of birth, which means every death gets counted. Every death pulls the average. And in ancient human populations, the deaths that pulled the average down were not spread evenly across all ages. They were concentrated almost entirely in one place. Childhood, infant mortality in ancient human populations was devastating by any modern standard. A significant proportion of children born did not survive their first year. A further significant proportion did not survive to age 5. The infectious diseases that now have vaccines killed children before immune systems had time to develop. The accidents that now have emergency rooms killed children before bodies had time to strengthen. The nutritional deficits that now have supplement industries killed children before growth had time to complete. Every child who died at age 1 pulled the average down by decades. Every child who died at age 3 pulled the average down by decades more. Add enough of those deaths to the calculation and the average drops to 30 regardless of what is happening to the adults in the population. An ancient human population where half of all children died before age 5 and every surviving adult lived to 65 would produce a life expectancy at birth of approximately 35 years. The adults are living to 65. The average says 35. Both numbers are true. One of them tells you almost nothing about what adult life in that population actually looked like. What happened if you survived childhood here is the number that changes everything. Conditional life expectancy, not life expectancy at birth. Life expectancy conditional on surviving to a specific age. What ancient humans who made it through childhood could actually expect their lives to look like. Ancient humans who survived to age 15 showed conditional life expectancy figures ranging from the mid-40s to the mid-50s, depending on the population and the period studied. Some populations showed conditional life expectancy for 15-year-olds reaching into the 60s. Hunter-gatherer populations studied in the modern era. Populations living in conditions that approximate ancient human life more closely than any other group alive today show the same pattern. High childhood mortality, pulling averages down dramatically. Adults who survive childhood living considerably longer than the averages suggest. Individuals reaching their 60s and 70s, and in some cases beyond within populations whose life expectancy at birth sits in the 30s. The 30-year figure describes what happened to children. It does not describe what happened to adults. And confusing the two has produced one of the most persistent and most misleading myths about ancient human life that modern people carry. Who was actually dying here is the specific breakdown that the archaeological and anthropological record provides. The first year of life was the most dangerous, by a significant margin. Infections that an adult immune system handles automatically overwhelmed infant immune systems that had not yet encountered them. Birth complications that modern obstetrics manages routinely were frequently fatal for both mother and child. Nutritional issues in the first weeks of life that modern neonatal care addresses were often unsurvivable without intervention. If you survived the first year, you faced the next danger zone, roughly ages 1 through 5. The immune system was developing but not complete. The child was mobile enough to encounter hazards but not experienced enough to avoid them. Infectious disease remained the primary killer. Accidents accounted for a significant proportion of deaths that illness did not claim. Survived to age 5 and the picture changed dramatically. The immune system had encountered enough pathogens to develop meaningful defenses. The body had strengthened enough to handle the physical demands of ancient life. The child had absorbed enough knowledge from the group to begin avoiding the most common sources of danger. Mortality dropped substantially. Survived to 15 and you were, statistically, in genuine adulthood by the standards of the ancient world. You were contributing to the group. You were hunting or gathering or both. You were building shelter and managing fire and navigating the social structures that held the group together. You were, by every functional measure, a full participant in ancient human life. And you had, depending on the population, somewhere between 30 and 50 more years ahead of you. Survival filter, run that through the survival filter. The ancient human body that survived childhood was not the fragile creature the 30-year myth implies. It was extraordinarily robust, calibrated by years of exposure to exactly the pathogens and physical demands and nutritional realities it would face as an adult, immune to diseases that had tried to kill it and failed, strong from years of the continuous physical activity that ancient life required without exception, carrying knowledge accumulated from every experience that had not killed it. The adults in ancient human groups were not fragile. They were the survivors of a selection process so brutal that the ones who made it through were genuinely extraordinary by any biological standard. The immune systems that made it to adulthood had defeated everything the ancient world threw at childhood. The bodies that made it to adulthood had been stress-tested by years of real physical demand. The minds that made it to adulthood carried accumulated survival knowledge that had been tested against actual survival conditions repeatedly and found sufficient. Ancient adult humans were not living shortened versions of modern lives. They were living complete lives measured by completely different standards in a completely different world, with completely different capabilities than the 30-year myth implies they possessed. The elders here is the part that most people never hear. Ancient human groups had elders, real elders, individuals in their 50s and 60s and beyond who represented something specific and irreplaceable within the group, something that younger members could not replicate regardless of strength or skill or knowledge. Experience across time. An elder in an ancient human group had survived droughts that younger members had not, had survived winters more severe than anything the current generation had encountered, had seen diseases come through the group and knew which plants had helped and which had not, had watched predator behavior across decades and understood patterns that required years of observation to recognize, had navigated social conflicts within the group and between groups, and carried the accumulated knowledge of what had worked and what had not. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer populations consistently find that elders hold a specific and critical function within the group that is completely separate from physical contribution. They are the living memory, the archive, the repository of everything the group has learned across a time span longer than any individual younger than them can access directly. The value of an elder in an ancient human group was not sentimental. It was practical and irreplaceable. A group with no elders was a group without institutional memory, without the knowledge of what had happened the last time conditions this bad arrived, without the experience that turns raw information into usable wisdom. Ancient human groups protected their elders because their elders were the most valuable information resource the group possessed. The skeletal record confirms this. Elderly individuals in ancient populations show evidence of care provided by the group across extended periods of reduced physical capacity, fed when they could not feed themselves, protected when they could not protect themselves, kept alive not out of sentiment but out of the same survival mathematics that kept injured hunters alive long enough to recover. The elders were worth it. The knowledge they carried was worth more than the cost of keeping them. What actually killed ancient humans here is the honest picture of what ended ancient lives before old age did. Infection remained the primary cause of death throughout ancient human history, not infection in the abstract. Specific infections at specific moments of vulnerability. A wound that breached the skin at a time when the immune system was already compromised by other demands. A respiratory infection during a winter when nutritional resources were depleted. An intestinal infection from water sources that became contaminated during a drought. The ancient immune system was powerful. It was not invincible. And the circumstances that created vulnerability were more common in the ancient world than they are now. Violence was a factor. Not the dominant factor that popular imagination sometimes suggests, but a real factor. Interpersonal violence within and between groups. Hunting accidents that that produced injuries with infection risk, encounters with predators that modern humans simply do not face. Childbirth was dangerous, consistently across all ancient human populations. The complications that modern obstetrics manages routinely were frequently unsurvivable without intervention that did not yet exist. Women who survived multiple childbirths were survivors of a process that claimed a significant proportion of ancient female lives during reproductive years. And then there were the random catastrophic events that no preparation prevents. A fall from height, a flood, a fire, a rock slide. None of these things killed ancient humans at 30 because ancient humans were biologically programmed to die at 30. They killed ancient humans when they encountered them in circumstances where the ancient body's considerable defenses were insufficient to overcome them. The 30-year figure is the average of all of that, not the program. The deepest truth here is what modern gerontologists studying ancient populations have quietly concluded. The human body was not designed for 30 years. The biological systems that maintain human life show no evidence of being programmed to fail at any specific age in the range that ancient populations were reaching. The telomere structures that govern cellular aging, the immune system architecture that fights disease, the cardiovascular systems that maintain circulation, the neurological systems that maintain cognition. All of them show capacity that extends well beyond what the 30-year myth implies ancient humans were reaching. The ancient humans who survived childhood were not living at the limit of their biological capacity. They were living full biological lives cut short by external circumstances when external circumstances became fatal, not by internal programming set to expire at 30. The body you are walking around in right now was not built for 30 years. It was built by people who routinely lived into their 50s and 60s and beyond when the external circumstances permitted it, who accumulated decades of knowledge and experience and passed it forward to groups that could not function without it, who watched grandchildren born and grew old and died in the company of people who knew them completely. The 30-year figure tells you what killed ancient children. The people who survived those children tell you something else entirely. They tell you that the human body is older and stranger and more capable than the number suggests, and that the number was never the whole story. The next time someone tells you that ancient humans only lived to 30, you know what to say now. Not to correct them, not to win an argument, but because the truth matters. Because the people that number was built from deserve more than a myth that makes them sound fragile. They were not fragile. They were the survivors of a childhood so dangerous that making it through was itself an extraordinary achievement. And the ones who made it through lived lives that were full and long and rich with the kind of knowledge that only comes from decades of paying attention to a world that demanded everything. They were not brief creatures passing quickly through a brutal world. They were the foundation of everything you are, built to last, built to carry forward everything they learned, built to reach you across 50,000 years. And they made it. This is Primal Pages. We do not just explain history. We give back to the people history reduced to a number the full complexity of what they actually were. If this changed something in how you understand where you came from, you already know what to do. We will be here every week, going deeper into the truth that the easy version never had room for.